After we'd done two kind of platform games, we were kind of looking for the next opportunities.
One part of the team went on to build DKC3, and the other one went on to create a new IP called Project
Dream, which at the time was on the Super NES.
We were all massive fans of Zelda, so we thought, let's do our take on an adventure game.
When I joined Dream, we just started to move it to N64. It had previously been started on SNES, but we were looking to move it onto this new machine.
We had a character on a screen. It looked very nice, but this was like really at the end of the Super NES's life.
We had Edson, which was the hero of the game, and we had Dinger, which was his kind of pet dog that he finds.
And he'd say, "Oh, dog, I can see a dog down there. I better go and see if he's all right." You'd go down, you'd get the dog, and then you'd be chased by trolls. And we worked on that for quite a number of months.
This kind of boy who kind of grew up in a village, and he went out into the big wide world where he gets embroiled in this kind of fantastic adventure. And the main bad guys were a bunch of pirates led by Captain Black Eye.
The view you had was kind of a bit like a game called Pandemonium or Nights into Dreams.
I think the scope of the thing was so large, we couldn't see any end in sight.
Greg and Tim had been talking, and they decided to change the whole styling of the game, and it became something akin to Super Mario 64.
We'd changed the main character from the boy, who we felt was a bit weak, and we felt we wanted something with a bit more character. So we investigated firstly a rabbit, and then secondly a bear.
Get rid of this guy. Let's get an animal in there. Bear. We're having a bear. That was it.
It went from being Dream to being Kazoo, but again, it was jumping on things and lots of kind of badges and different things you could be doing.
And it's all going to be instruments: banjo, piccolo, all of those. You're like, yes, I'll just do it right now.
So we had kind of banjo in this kind of big, sprawling adventure game that we weren't quite sure how we were ever going to finish. So we decided to can Dream at that point, and focus on something we felt a lot more confident we could kind of build.
And I remember talking with Chris Stamper in the canteen once, and he asking me what I thought of banjo, and I still think I was a little bit annoyed that the rabbit had been dumped.
We took banjo from Project Dream and kind of put him in his own game. We wanted it to be a platformer.
Should have been a rabbit. It would have been Bunny Kazooie or something.
The roaming world of Banjo, we encountered a whole new set of problems because we were working in 3D now, and we had things like a camera that we had to keep control of and work out where it was going to go and what's going to happen when the player goes behind a wall.
So we started developing like a move set for Banjo, and I wanted to give him a double jump, having kind of seen Mario's double jump, but I wanted it to be more flexible so the player could double jump anywhere they like.
We were up against Mario. I wanted to try and beat Mario, and that was our thing. Try to do that.
Now, what would explain away the fact that this fat bear can jump in midair? So I think we pondered a few ideas, and when we're getting desperate, and usually when you get desperate, all the crazy ideas come out. And one idea we had was a pair of wings could appear out of this backpack.
All these sort of things that we just encounter as we started developing, and we kind of just tackled them as we encountered them.
So this pair of wings kind of came out of the backpack and flapped, and it explained it away, and it fitted perfectly.
We started testing out proper sort of 3D levels, and we got the character jumping around and swimming and things, and it then went from Kazoo to Banjo Kazoo.
Well, let's have a pair of legs that appear out the backpack to kind of assist Banjo, so it's not him running, it's these legs.
So we then added EI on the end, or IE rather, and it became Banjo Kazooie, and then we just made that.
These wings and these legs could belong to another character, and this character lives in Banjo's backpack and comes out at occasions to help him along. So that was where Kazooie was born. It was probably the breakthrough moment, and then all the dialogue, the interjection between them, and Kazooie being sarcastic and adventurous, and Banjo being like kind of a bit dim-witted and slow. All of that came afterwards, and it was all literally just built on this wanting a double jump.
We needed like a shaman character, and then it was really just down. We were just left to do, get on with it. So Mumbo quickly took shape with his skull and his feathers and his furry pants, and in those days you could literally draw the character, get someone to approve it, model it, animate it and have it in the game. It was 2 or 3 days.
So Banjo and Kazooie never speak, but initially they did. I think one of the reasons we made them have that strange garbled noise. We realised that we were going to have to record so much speech, it was going to increase development time considerably.
I did the voice of Mumbo, of course, Ikum Bokum.
The voices for all the characters were just kind of different. A lot of them were Grant, but a lot of them were different people just kind of mumbling sort of different little phrases.
The Ikum Bokum, I just played with it, it sounded good. So Ikum Bokum is made up of come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. So like I went got what I bought it big got eat up like that, and I recorded myself doing that, and then I cut it up into pieces.
When we'd been working on Dream, I'd been doing some of the voices for the boy, and then when he changed to the bear, Tim was looking for a noise. There are noises that he would make and words that he would say. So I did some of the voices for Banjo then, and then it transformed into the gargled noise at the end. So the Kazooie needed a special noise as well, and it needed to be separate from Banjo. It needed to be noticeably different. So we made her a much sharper noise because she was a Breagull. So that was why she was Bree. Stop and Swap, that came about because we discovered by accident that if you pull out the cartridge on the N64, put in another cartridge, the contents of the memory, the RAM, are still there. So we realised that we could use this to make a transfer of some information from one game to another.
The idea was to either reward players for playing rare games, so it's like the more you play, the more you get rewarded, or to actually swap items between games, and that's where the Stop and Swap came from. And so you had to like quickly grab the cartridge, grab it, and then put the other one in. And I think we were concerned that people were going to do damage to their cartridges.
Unfortunately, we didn't tell Nintendo because we didn't think they'd really need to know until towards the end. And then, of course, when we did tell them, they said that's not really going to work, and it's not guaranteed to work in all cases for the N64. So as a result, we had to drop the feature, but the remnants of that still exist in both games.
The game, I think, was well received. Again, another massive thing for me was to see Banjo at the top of the all formats charts in the UK.
Yes, I think players appreciated the humour and the charm and the characters we managed to put into the world.
When I see my son play Banjo-Kazooie, it's really heartwarming because it just feels right?
It felt like almost every character you came across had a story to tell. Most of them were sob stories that you had to help out, so it's almost like Banjo was like an agony aunt going around fixing all these problems. So,
like running around in Banjo was fun without doing anything. It was just fun to run around, you know.
I think they loved it, didn't they? What are you saying?
It had all that magic about it. You could feel it. It was in the walls.
I think it was just the whole immersive nature of the world, the fantastic music, the kind of just the charm of it was kind of what elevated it from maybe just another 3D platform into something that kind of people remember.
Battletoads is a beat-em-up game. Battletoads is a platform beat-em-up game. A platform beat-em-up strategy racing. Battletoads Battletoads is a game that we produced featuring 3 characters which were toads, called Rash, Zitz and Pimple. We wanted a set of characters that we could produce huge merchandise for. I remember the Batman film had just hit the movies, and we were looking at all of the different merchandising that you could buy for the film and for the character, and we wanted something like that. The t-shirts, the plastic models, the bedspreads, everything.
At the time with Battletoads, I can remember Tim being very impressed by the Ninja Turtles. So it was meant to be a sort of tongue-in-cheek version, or at least I thought it was meant to be a tongue-in-cheek version of the Turtles.
So it's kind of a typical example of Rare's looking at what was popular and then kind of putting our spin on it, kind of amping it up, making it a bit more edgy, a bit more kind of violent.
We went through all kinds of ideas and names. I think I was going to call them the amphibians at one time, but we ended up with Battletoads, and that worked. I wanted it to look kind of Disney-like, but I wasn't anywhere near a good enough artist for that. So we came up with a few different gimmicks, and we had the hands expanding and the foot turning into a huge boot. I think the ability to be able to transform limbs rather than carry actual weapons around, that's what made them unique. I think if you picked up the original NES version of Battletoads now, I think you get a bit of a shock, because it was a very precise, very difficult game to play.
Back then they were kind of quite short games, so one way of getting more kind of playability was to provide the player with a decent level of challenge. Mark, who was leading the software effort, was like a really talented player, so he'd set the general difficulty level around what he was good at.
He made it so difficult, and you had to be precise to the 100th of the second when to press the button on the controller.
At the time we were avid game players, and it got to the point where I could do the turbo tunnel without losing a life. We even tried to do the last section with the really fast walls with our eyes closed, and we got really close to finishing it, but no one could ever do it. The reviews were quite complimentary on kind of not only how challenging it was, everyone liked it, but I think the variety of the levels was the key to how well it was received. Like on one level it would be sideways scrolling doing one thing, the next level you'd be on a rope going down a thing, then you'd be on a tunnel, then you'd be on some kind of like weird device, then you'd be on the back of a snake. It like jumped around all over the place. It was such a breath of fresh air in terms of the breadth of gameplay in it.
In the arcade version of Battletoads, we were able to be even more over the top with the violence, the comedy violence, than the NES, because there was obviously certain restrictions on what we could produce for a console. So we went as pretty much extreme as we could be, and I think that was to the benefit of the product.
It took a long time to produce because it was all a new kind of game for us, but it was a fun one to work with.
It was like building a car, and you start with no parts. You've got to just start manufacturing each of the parts and then putting them together.
Chris Stamper started working on a board. He actually made the arcade board himself.
Meanwhile, we had to write all the software. Well, I had to write all the software from scratch, so all the audio drivers, all the audio software, all the graphics software. There'd be points where we'd tweak it and we'd say, oh, the hardware is not fast enough here, we need to make some changes. And then he'd add that in, and then we'd change the software again. So there was really quite a bit of collaboration.
Working on the arcade one was a great experience, and taught me a lot about a very different type of design, which wasn't all about let's try and keep the player playing for hours. It's literally, let's get the player on the machine, let's take some money off them, let's kill them off as quick as possible, but let's make sure they've had a good enough time so they want to put more money in.
At the end of Battletoads Arcade, we had a boss called Robomanus that you tried to beat, and we were having trouble balancing the game, so it felt like you could beat him if you were on your own when you weren't that good, versus if there was 3 players coming in and really hitting him.
We hit upon this idea of making him super tough at the start, even to the point where you couldn't actually do any damage to him.
For the first 45 seconds, nothing you did actually affected him in any way, but it looked like it did.
It's probably the best idea I've ever had in the industry. It's like, how can we make the final boss take more money? I know. Let's make it so we can't kill him.
There was a few games that we did that actually had a crossover element to them. I think one of the ones, which was a rather odd one, was Battletoads Double Dragon.
I'm guessing it came from the Tradewest link, because Tradewest were licensees for both Battletoads and Double Dragon.
It just seemed a bit nuts to have these cartoon characters with expanding hands that turn into fists and drills, mixed up with these martial arts dudes from an arcade machine.
Being as the Toads were our characters and Billy and Jimmy weren't, we were pondering whether to make the Toads have better moves and be slightly stronger, so they'd always have this like slight advantage. But in the end, we did the right thing, and it was all fairly balanced.
From Battletoads, I think we were going to try and do a spin-off game called Warhogs with the character called Captain Pork. I think that was Tim's design. I can remember drawing these 2 characters that were like big, chunky warhog bikers, and they were going to shout pork swords every time they went into battle, but we didn't do it eventually. Battletoads ran over several different consoles. I think we had a Game Boy version, a Super NES version, an NES version, an arcade machine. We had a cartoon, so it's had a pretty good run of it, but I think it'd be quite a nice one to be revived. I'd always love to see a new Battletoads game out there. Maybe we'll make one.
So Conker started out as a cute platformer.
He was a standard Nintendo character. Squeaked, jumped.
Mario 64 had just arrived on the scene, and that was a game changer, I suppose, in terms of the next generation of games.
Of course, as soon as everyone saw that, we were like, okay, guess we better do something like that.
There was an awful lot of content and there was lots of fun ideas, but it just really wasn't gelling as a finished game.
And what happened was, as Banjo came along, and they completely torpedoed us. I think Conker, as it was sort of floundering as a concept because it was too similar.
Chris Seaver took over. He was working on art and then became designer on it.
I took the initiative and I came up with an idea that I thought might work.
I think he just wanted to give it a bit more of an edge, really, which is kind of his character as a person.
So we thought, well, let's just go for the comedy element, but let's make it more kind of edgy in terms of its violence. You know, let's get some narrative in there so we can get the personality of the character out.
For me, there was one key moment which turned it into the game that it was.
I think Tim came up with the idea for the beehive.
The beehive had been stolen from the bees by the nasty wasps.
But what wasn't in there was the reason why. It was the narrative and the punchline.
You're being chased by wasps, and you're coming down the path, and you have to return the queen her hive.
What can we do with that? Oh, I know. We'll make it violent. we'll make it completely over the top.
Eat that, mother buzzer.
That was kind of the light bulb moment, I suppose, for that game. And we showed that to Tim and Chris, and they went, yes, love it, just make more of that.
Conker was evolved over its life, and one of the things that came out of when we were designing levels were the movie parodies. I think the first one was the Terminator, and in the bottom it was, each time you hit it, a bit would drop off. And in the cutscene, a bit dropped off his eye, and you can see behind that it was a robot. I thought, oh, we can get some Terminator cues in here.
Susie 9mm.
I'm right here, sweetie pie. You just tell me where to shoot.
And that's really where it came from. It was like, oh, actually, that worked really well, because it gave us cues for things like music. It gave us ideas for the design itself, for the gameplay. So we did the Catfish one, which was Godzilla. I mean, there were films around at the time, so it was very much like a kind of a zeitgeisty thing. The Saving Private Ryan one. Okay, well, we've got a beach and you've got to get up it.
We spent a lot of time really trying to get that feeling of, you know, the movies that you know and love. I spent months animating squirrels on fire with their legs falling off and their arms falling off, and there's a part where the squirrel picks up an arm and he sticks it back on and he's like, ooh. And I dreamt about squirrels like burning for like a long time. It had a real effect, I mean.
I was kind of giving hints of some of those soundtracks, and The Matrix being another obvious one with the lobby scene. And that was quite a good interactive piece of music, actually, because when you could hit the bullet time at any point, so we had this kind of channel fade on the music that kind of slowed down and went into this dreamy slow thing. And then back into the kind of hard-hitting industrial beat.
If it hadn't have been The Matrix, if the movie parodies hadn't been there, the gameplay would have been completely different and probably not as good. So it really complemented the game.
Cutscenes were kind of the reward, the sort of payoff at the end of the joke, the equivalent of our, Mario style. We had no script whatsoever. You'd say it's kind of this, it's kind of that, and we would just bounce ideas backwards and forwards. I'd be constantly record.
And I think that helped because it meant that it was a lot more fluid.
This worked because Chris was designing it, so he had a very good understanding of what the next task was, what you were going to do.
A lot of the creativity, certainly a lot of the funny stuff, just came out of the spontaneity of what we were doing.
We were so excited whenever a new scene came in. We knew we had something special because we'd still be giggling about it months later. Just the way a certain animation was or a way a certain word was said. You'd normally stick to death of the game by the time it's finished.
Chris was doing all the voices in Conquer. He wanted me to do a couple of the other characters as well. So he goes to me, we want Barry to be American, so can you do an American accent? And I was literally never been anywhere in my life. I'd just flown over from Dublin, and all I could think of was to add every so often. It says, "Hi, you've reached Barry's place." Awful. Even now when I hear it, I cringe.
Mighty Pooh, he came about, as most things did with Conquer, that's just something Chris thought about. What can we do next to kind of repulse people or whatever, or make them laugh? And he just said, I want a boss that's a big giant turd that sings an opera.
Probably one of the most memorable characters in Conquer.
Me. I am the great mighty Pooh, and I'm going to throw my shit at you. A huge supply of tish comes from my chocolate starfish. How about some scat, you little twat?
It's really random. You're throwing toilet roll at a giant poo monster. So something beautiful had to come from that, and we're lucky it was Mr. Marlowe.
He does a fair bit of sort of amateur dramatics, and he's well into his singing.
I know originally there were supposed to be these little sweet corn, and me and Ashton were going to be the Mighty Pooh's backing singers.
It's going to be hard to beat that. It'll probably be on my gravestone. Here lies Chris Marlowe, voice of the great Mighty Pooh.
Now that's what I call a bowel movement.
So the original design was actually a lot bigger. It was a much bigger game. We built, and it kind of got added to. Things got merged into other things.
Chris had the clever idea of getting the start sorted and the end sorted, and then it doesn't matter what you chop out of the middle, because people just won't know it was going to be there.
When I started, there was this huge sprawling land. By the time I ended, most of the edge worlds had been cut out, and we just had focused on these bits in the centre. I just remember looking at it one day and seeing lots of X's through a bunch of the worlds. We're like, we want to get this done in time. We're going to get rid of all this shit.
Mainly, the game is intact. Most of the stuff, surprisingly, is kept in. I mean, if you look at the amount of mechanics that were in Conquer, there's a lot. Normally the first hour of a game is the most fun because it's all fresh. But with Conquer, it's still fresh at the end, and I think that's possibly why when people play it, they're surprised. They go, "Ooh, I thought this was just about a swearing squirrel."
There was an unveiling, I think it was in Vegas at some English pub, where they showed it to the press for the first time, because this was kind of, I suppose they were all thinking it was going to be 12 Tales, cutesy, sort of Mario-esque type platformer.
They showed them the Great Mighty Pooh, which was the big thing where everyone just went, what is this? I don't know. Everyone was laughing and stuff, but I think there was probably as many people with their jaws on the floor going, this is Nintendo.
Nintendo were very lenient, really, with an awful lot of stuff.
And Nintendo really supported it, and to the point that at E3, even though they showed it behind closed doors, they built a proper bar where you had to show ID to go in, and you could grab a beer and play the game.
I mean, I played it fairly recently, And I'm shocked at some of the stuff. I probably would change some of the stuff now. The obvious one is the sunflower. That whole sequence is like, no, I couldn't do that again. If it was made now and if it was the same team, it wouldn't. I don't think we'd do a game that people would want, because they'd want the original Conquer. But again, we're not the people to make that game, ironically, because we've changed. My tastes have changed and I've moved on. You'd have a hard time getting it made now. So the only way for anyone to play it is to play the original, because I don't think there's going to be anything like it again.
I knew who Rare was and I always respected them, but I never got to meet them until a week after I started at Nintendo. In come Tim and Chris Stamper with a 100% finished version of the first level of Donkey Kong Country. My first real task at Nintendo was to go figure out how much money it was going to take to buy all their hardware and software. Tim and Chris are like, there's this other game we'd like you to see. And they pitched me a game, funny enough, called Brute Force. That was Killer Instinct.
It wasn't really anything other than just a demo. But when Nintendo came and had a look at it and they were looking at the 3D characters that we were building, they asked us if we could do a fighting game based on that because they liked the way it looked.
They had a block button, they had no combos, it was just sort of a very simple, I wouldn't say Mortal Kombat clone, because they had some really good ideas of the way they were going to let you level up your character in the arcade, but it wasn't KI. So I'd been playing a ton of Street Fighter, I'm a huge fighting game fan, and so like I usually do when I meet with developers, like, that was a great idea. What if you did this?
Within the first 5 minutes of being in the game, he was going kapow, pow, caw, coo, coo. And he was really into his martial arts films and his martial arts games, and so we thought maybe we've got a real enthusiast here. And him and Chris Tilston together kind of came up with a combo system, developed that, and took it to the next level.
I wrote this spec, about 10 pages of here's the way we should think about combos for Killer Instinct. And in that original doc, you know, we talked about just open, auto double, and finisher. It was Rare that came up with the idea of linkers. They came up with air juggles. But we again had to build all this from the animation set that we had in place.
When we first started putting the animation into Killer Instinct, we tried hand animation, but then we switched over to using a motion capture suit.
The best motion capture device that we could buy, and that's what we looked for, was something called Flock of Birds. It was basically a tethered solution. In other words, every one of these little sensors that was on the body of the motion capture artist had to be connected to a wire that went to a harness that connected to this huge apparatus on the ceiling.
We got the 3D animation from data which was pulled in from small magnets which were on different parts of the body.
You had to stand on this stage that underneath had a humongous electromagnet. These were all basically being detected by this giant magnet. And because the technology was young, it broke every time we did a character.
The good thing about it was you could tell who was in the suit by who was moving around because of their weight and their size. And I remember putting high heels on and getting into the motion capture suit to try and walk like a lady.
Over time, we got good at, let's capture the special moves first and a whole bunch of just regular punches. You know, we think they're gonna look like this. And if Flock of Birds didn't go down at the end of our session, we'd have a whole bunch of extra moves. But some of our characters we had to build moves out of because the Flock of Birds stopped working. And so it's like, well, we don't really have the move that we wanted. Well, we can build it out of these parts of these other moves. It's not a 3D game. All we had to do was find the frames that would look right with hits. Sometimes legs would be in strange angles. We didn't care. What we cared about was what the actual combo ended up looking like.
Some of the characters, I think, were inspired by some of the films that I used to watch when I was a kid. I used to be a big fan of films like Jason and the Argonauts, or anything that had the Ray Harryhausen animation in there. The skeletons, the Greek gods, they always look fantastic. So we had the opportunity to make some monsters, so we put Spinal in there. and Idle and Gargos. They were influenced by a lot of the features that you could produce with Maya. You could produce fire, and you could produce ice and water, so of course you're going to produce a fireman and an iceman. So we came up with Glacius and with Cinder. Saberwolf was, of course, a bit of a throwback to the old Ultimate game Saberwolf. Jago actually started off as a test generic character for the motion capture, and so I built a ninja, and because hair was quite a difficult thing to animate, I gave him this big quiff at the front, and it began to look a little bit more like my hairstyle at the time, so it kind of got tagged that I was that character and I was building myself. It wasn't true, it was just a guy in sort of a rubber suit, which I haven't got. I tell a lie, I have got a rubber suit, but I don't wear that so often now.
So I go there for my third visit to Rare. This is all in a pretty short period of time. And we built Jago's moveset. Did the motion capture for Jago, and we built his first open auto double and finisher combo. That was the first combo that was built for Killer Instinct. But what we didn't have was audio.
So we first tried out cries and some hit noises for Jago. And we did it really crudely with just a microphone and like a cassette deck on the floor. It sounded awful. I think Martin Hollis said at the time, "You just sound like a brumming ninja."
I get Chris Tilston on the phone. "Dude, you gotta hear this. You gotta hear it." And what? And it's like, well, we put sound effects in, and they put the phone up to the mic, and you hear. We'd also done grunts and pain. So when you're attacking, and when you're getting hits, so you had the Jago attacking sounds, all the hit sounds, and the Jago taking damage sounds, because it was just Jago versus Jago, and it sounded amazing. And it was like addicting to them. You know, once they got that, you know, they were like, "We are so on." And the Kilkin! And all of the different, all those hit sounds, they were myself on Jago. I think I put a mouthful of yogurt in behind the microphone, and that was how I did the voice for Glacius. One of the main voices that people remember from Killer Instinct was the announcer.
I suppose Sud came around from his announcer voice in Battletoads.
You immediately imagine this huge, big, hulking guy, but it's Chris.
He just had a really powerful voice. He almost blew the mic, actually.
Ultra Combo! We made some things really loud. So if even an operator came in and was like, "This game's kind of loud, I'll turn it down," you heard Ultra Combo! You know, or you heard them scream out once a combo got about past about 6 or 7 hits. We upped the volume of the announcer. We made sure that every hit effect was very, very snappy and had punch, really high highs on some of these hits. And then we'd layer them with a low end that would make them carry like all the way across the arcade.
Joel Hochberg was our associate in America, and he owned a few amusement arcades, and so we would often put a machine in one of his arcades to see how it did and whether it attracted people to play it or not.
The arcade industry was going like this. In fact, we were concerned before we shipped that maybe we've missed the arcade business.
Joel's son Scott, he said to me that there was just a crowd of people standing by this machine, so we knew that we were onto something that was going to be pretty popular.
It was taking, I don't know, it was taking a lot. It was like $25,000 a week or something. It was one thing that we were using to test it.
The team built an arcade machine, Pilot, the engine to build the game, the cabinet, the controls, the art, the entire game, everything. About 10.5 months.
We come in at 9 and we go home at probably midnight.
These guys were young and adrenaline filled.
We spent such a lot of time late at night, early in the morning, just living, eating, sleeping, breathing, fighting games.
When KI-1 shipped, nothing else was close. Visually it was beautiful, and you could hear it from all the way across the arcade.
Describing Viva Pinata to anyone is a bit weird.
Very brightly coloured garden simulator.
A gardening game where you had to look after pinata characters or little cute animals in a garden and kind of like become friends with them and kind of farm in a way.
The player attracts, befriends and keeps a host of papery creatures in their garden.
It's just almost a garden of chaos that you have to try and corral and control in your own special way and customising it into your own image.
It was a 6-page document that Tim Stamper had written. The story I always remember is he talked about a hawk moth that he found, a hummingbird hawk moth that he found in his garden. And he'd just seen it one day when he was out. It was lovely and sunny, shine on a flower, and this really strange creature was hovering above one of the flowers. And he identified it, and then he looked about what sort of things he would need to make more of those appear in his garden. And that was the idea for the whole game.
It's just kind of nature's food chain and life cycle, so it's kind of like, can we turn that into a fun game?
We thought we'd be able to work on a kind of a mobile device of some sort, you know, with this idea starting with, you know, nothing and this one seed, and then, you know, ending up with a whole sort of menagerie of animals and stuff.
Microsoft had a device called a Pocket PC, which was like this little kind of handheld, shrunk down PC device, which we thought was would be an ideal platform. It was portable, it had sufficient power, and we could do all these ideas of how the pinatas moved around. But the Pocket PC was never to be, and we kind of moved it onto Xbox, which gave us the obviously the graphical fidelity and the grunt to make it look awesome. We certainly spent some time trying to work out what the pinata should look like.
I was tasked with trying to come up with a style that would bring everything together. And so there's lots of ideas about them being toys or being kind of like soft kind of ragdoll things, or even just kind of like a generic cartoon looking thing. But what we wanted to do was something that made it all feel like a family. I really liked some of the graphics and artwork around luchadors. And so I've got this whole kind of Mexican thing kind of bubbling in my head at the time. And then realised that if we turn these characters into pinatas, it would gel the entire world together. So the lizard is a pinata and the horse is a pinata, even though they're a different species and a different thing, it still kind of gelled it all together.
It was quite clear almost immediately that it was going to have a better home on a bigger console that allowed us to do more of the animal behaviour things that we wanted.
Because I think the first time I got my hands on it, it was still quite early. There was an awful lot of grass and there were some bunnies, which I always enjoy. But my residing memory of that was the fact that you could mate pinatas at that point to create their offspring, but the mating code wasn't exactly solid.
We really, really wanted the idea that the animals behaved in a natural way, but we had to find ways for us to explain it to people that didn't just make us seem like we were filthy perverts. So what we came up with was the romance dance. People just loved those dance routines, and it was perfectly charming, and nobody, you know, we didn't really have any problems with people having animals reproducing all over their screen.
The artist Neil Price said, look, I've got a great idea. Every romance dance, we can have a different style of music. And I was like, yeah, that's great. And I suddenly thought, just a minute, that's 60 animals? That's going to be not... So we had like 20 seconds of like dance music or ballroom dancing or metal or punk. And we had tons of fun making the noises for the animals. Like I did tons of them, I can't even remember. 60 animals or something like that.
Initially, we started looking at real animal noises, but it just felt wrong. We suggested that the people on the team just took animals and then made noises for them. We had all the animations in ready to go, so we could just come up to the music department, sit and watch the animations and try and make any type of noise that we thought would fit. So after the first game, it was proposed that we were going to do a DS version of the game, which just seemed like insanity. It just seemed crazy to try and cram that huge game into such a small device. And We gave it to the team we had here, our internal handheld team, and we kind of forgot about it. And then a few months later, pretty much stuff was coming into the studio, and we were approving it, and it appeared this version, this DS version of our enormous game that we'd struggled to get going on an Xbox 360 and get all the features we wanted, and they pretty much had it feature complete on a much smaller, much more reduced handheld. So they did just an incredible job. So a bunch of the work we'd done kind of rolled straight into the next game. It gave us a leg up so that we could start immediately working on the sequel.
We had this big discussion about whether we should try and squeeze everything that we wanted into 6 months and create some DLC, or should we try and create some time, like give ourselves 18 months and create a full sequel.
At the time we wanted different environments, the deserts, we wanted underwater stuff, we were talking about kind of having a kind of a whole, expanding the universe of Pinatas to be a lot wider, so it just seemed like a natural thing to do, and as I say, no one told us not to, so we rolled straight into it.
We want to carry on to make this the best that it can be. So yeah, I think Pinata 2 was pretty much driven out of developer passion.
I'm really proud of the score. I'm right, the music track. I'm really proud of it. I thought I did a good job on that one. Bedtime Story from Viva Pinata 2. It's on my website, that one. That was my favourite. It was the last piece that we recorded in Prague. It was a really emotional tearjerker for me, and that one has really always been my favourite track, I think. It still is still on stuff to this day. And I remember I had to go, the recording finished, and the guy said to me, you should go out to the orchestra, thank the orchestra, and I kind of went onto the podium and went, you know, you've all played so, and just burst into tears like that.
There was all of these games over here, all kind of brown and green and blue, and then over here was like Pinata. It was like bright and lively and full of colours, and offered a very, very different type of game to what was available.
People really took it to heart, and we got reports back of some really interesting things. People playing the game and then doing things in the real world that were to do with our game. And one of those was, and was fairly widely reported at the time, was a guy that proposed to his future wife through our game. And he'd organised a garden. He used the ring item that could be made inside the game, and he'd invited her to a match that they shared together. And he sent a crate, I think, over with the ring inside, and the message was a marriage proposal.
The end result, really happy. I couldn't pick one thing that I thought, you know, was a favourite. It's just the whole thing was again another really great game to have made.
The market's changed quite a lot now, where more different games and slightly more unusual games that seem to be far more accepted. So I think there's something to pick up in a package full of lots of rare games. I think it'll be well thought of, and it'll be a little gem of kind of oddness.
I think people like Viva Pinata. It's a much deeper game than people think, because it had that cutesy rare bit on the top of it. But underneath it was pretty complicated.
Hopefully there'll be people that have played it before will kind of rediscover the kind of charm that the garden had, but I think hopefully there'll be a kind of a new set of players that will kind of hopefully appreciate the kind of being in a really special world.
Blast School was codenamed Bull during its development at Rare. I'm pretty sure that's short for Bulldozer and not anything else.
There was Heavy Duty, which I quite liked. I thought that would have been good. Heavy Metal.
There's a version out with Blast Radius.
Power Dozer.
Then we went to Blast Dozer, and it was Blast Dozer for a while on its first debut at Shinkai in 1995. But we ran into a problem where the name wasn't trademarked worldwide, so the American version and the European version became called Blast School. It was a project that had been started, I believe, about 10 times at Rare over various different formats.
I think it was Chris Stamper who came up with the original concept that knocking over buildings would be fun.
What we needed to do was find a purpose for the gameplay.
It's quite a difficult thing to do, really, because buildings don't fight back at all. They're just sat there.
So we came up with the idea of the constant moving object, which was a vehicle that moved through the level.
You had to knock down buildings in a way of this runaway truck.
It didn't really have an identity to start off with, but it eventually ended up looking like a sausage transporter or a Savoy truck, as we thought. People always wanted to have a more control over it, but that was kind of the point of the game, was it was always predictable and you knew where it was. I mean, it wasn't a particularly new concept. There were games like Lemmings, which you control what happened to the characters rather than control the characters themselves. There was quite a lot of influence on Blastcore. One of the more subtle ones was probably Thunderbirds. It was an international rescue team where they used a variety of vehicles specific to each mission. We would kind of design an environment and then work out which vehicles would best suit the environment. Blastcore had a reputation, possibly unfairly, of being a very hard game as well. It was a reflection of the type of game players we were at the time. The most obvious one is the dump truck.
Backlash, as it's called. Yeah. I went over the top and had like animating textures, like rendered the texture so there was a light source going around it, and as it spun, it lit correctly. It was just it's overkill.
A lot of people seem to hate it, but I thought that was the most fun vehicle. It really needed quite a bit of skill to knock down buildings. You had to swing around the back end skids and get the back end to go into the buildings to knock them over.
That was actually the mechanic from Mario Kart. It was a jump turn in Mario Kart, so you press the button and swing the back end of the truck. Some of the later vehicles became a bit more flamboyant. We had our artist Ricky Berwick. Basically, he would come up with the idea and we'd just try and shoehorn that into the game.
In vogue was manga at the time, so we ended up kind of trying to spice it up a bit by putting a lot of robots and things in there.
So, for instance, if you look at Thunder Fist, he's only got one arm. Because we ran out of polygons, it wouldn't fit in memory, so we actually just took an arm off, and that's how it appears in the game.
I mean, we had quite a few vehicles in Blastcore. A lot of them didn't get very far, and a lot of them were developed just as test vehicles when we were using the N64 emulator.
Lee Ray did a lot of cool designs.
Some of them didn't get in because, well, they were more just of something which was supposed to look nice rather than play well. That kind of came later for a lot of the vehicles. Some of them didn't get in because they were just too out there, basically. There was one with a groin cab in it. Don't ask why, it was very strange.
There was quite a lot of vehicles we ruled out. The main criteria had to be that had a unique ability to knock down buildings, so I think in some of the early demos, and even at Shoshinkai, we featured a Scorpion model.
I remember Richard Nielsen putting the Scorpion thing in, it was like...
The thing was they didn't have a unique enough ability, so yeah, you just walk on looking like a Scorpion, but it just runs into stuff. We struggled to make those into fun vehicles that could actually have a proper destructive purpose.
There's quite a variety of tunes in Blastcore, and I put it down to partly Martin Wakely giving me the freedom to do that, but also more than likely because I can't concentrate on anything for more than 5 minutes, so I just go off and just do whatever was in my head at the time.
Yeah, when we started on Blastcore, we didn't even have the hardware available. All we had was a massive fridge-sized computer.
I'm sitting there and I had like an Onyx beside me, which is like a £250,000 machine.
I know the artists were working on machines that were supposed to emulate what the N64 would be, but this was years before it came out, so we were all kind of doing stuff in the dark a little bit.
And we had so much equipment, it created a bit of a hothouse, so there was like the temperatures used to get astronomical. And no aircon, so but we toughed it out.
The hardware changed all the way through, so the final specs for the N64 were nailed down to quite a long way towards the end of the project.
To be honest, it was a great relief to get the final hardware, and I think we actually Rare got the first boards in Europe, actually, from what I remember. There was just a couple.
The main feature that didn't get in that I was gutted about was the Rumble Pack.
I remember seeing the very first prototype of it, and it was a tiny little motor with a bit of solder on it that span round. And I remember at the time thinking that was terrible. And we were asked to use it, and I vetoed it and said that I didn't think it would be of any use. And it's now become completely standard in the industry, so proves how little I know. Start to finish, it took us 13 months with a core team of 4 graduates basically, and then we got another 2 or 3 people in towards the end, but I think there was never more than 7 people working on the game at any time.
So I think the cancel button was like that. And then obviously I think because we really wanted to do it, they just kind of let us do it.
Blastcore was received pretty well. I think it got good reviews. Some people didn't know how to take it though.
I mean, basically I went out and bought every magazine that had a review, even the German one I bought. I had a review of Blastcore and took it all personally.
It's a bit of a cult classic and people still talk to me about it now.
We were a young company, as in most of us were in our early 20s, and absolutely dedicated to what we were working on.
There was a lot of people just used to come in because we were all computer geeks and we had no homes to go to, basically. Like a place for lost boys to come and make computer games.
Jet Force Gemini was a third-person space shooting game. No one had ever really done a third-person targeting system, and we kind of did a lot of groundwork on that.
We kind of introduced as well quite early on though an adventure element, so it was kind of, if you think of things like Mario 64 and Tomb Raider at the time, that kind of thing, we wanted it to feel like it was this big world still that you could explore in, and you didn't just have to go around shooting everything. So we did a lot of work trying to get the balance right between being able to adventure and being able to feel like you had enough accuracy and enough enjoyment in the shooting to make it feel like a proper fully fledged shooter.
I remember Paul Mountain and Martin Wakely huddled over the keyboard. Paul was stripping back all the code that he didn't need from Diddy Kong Racing, and then working with Martin to come up with a nice tight third-person shooter control scheme.
It was also, we wanted it to be challenging, not just to be kind of a very lightweight game. So you had the kind of standard thing where you could play through the game and you'd maybe get to like 40-50% completion and get a kind of reward, if you like, for getting to that point in the game. But there was also all these kind of side challenges, and one of them, probably the most famous one in terms of people who played it, is the one for collecting all the tribals, because that could be quite tricky if you were a bit kind of trigger happy, because you could lose a few in the crossfire. So, it was a lot of fun to make. Everybody who was on there was kind of mad about space games and space films, for that matter. We'd all kind of grown up on this stuff in the 70s, 80s and early 90s.
Martin would kind of spec out the designs for how the level should work, but really in terms of the visuals and even down to a lot of the finer details, we had so much fun. I remember early in the project making a trip into Birmingham to go to the big comic shops there, just looking for sci-fi comics and toy catalogues that were full of kind of spaceship toys and robot toys.
Visually, we were very influenced by a 1980s cartoon called Battle of the Planets. And the original character models all looked like that. We eventually changed the character models, but the original look was very much based on that cartoon series.
The team lead was Martin Wakely, and I went to him to talk about the music, and he said, well, we're basing the game on old school arcade games, and there isn't any music in old school arcade games, so I was a bit stuck to know where to go with. And luckily, Robin Beanland took over and did a very, very good job on music.
It was a pretty tight timeline to get the score done for Jet Force. So Martin was kind of just basically whatever you want to do with it. It's, you know, it's up to you. And I decided to sort of go more the sort of John Williams sci-fi orchestral type thing. Get as close to an orchestra as I could do with a small amount of memory and a cartridge. Really pleased with that. Really pleased with the theme tune, which is actually an old Conker tune. We had a stadium in 12 Tales and I used that tune and sort of filled it out and made more of it.
So there were some quite off-the-wall things in Jet Force. We had the kind of main game, the kind of cohesive space game, but then we had a bit of fun as well while we were making it. So there were lots of little things that kind of made it into there. One of them was the fish food.
So the fish food in Jet Force was probably one of the most controversial features, bizarrely. The fish food was there to feed fish, and that's all it did, and that seemed to infuriate some people who felt it should have a higher purpose.
So what does the fish food do? And the answer would be, you use it to feed fish. Then the question would come back, what can you actually do with it? What could you use the fish food for in the game? And the answer was, you feed fish with it. And this was just a recurring theme about what the actual fish food, what purpose the fish food served in the game.
So there was a lot of hidden stuff in Jet Force Gemini. I put a lot of content in that game. There was 2 different race games featured in the game. One of them was a top-down arcade racer, heavily influenced by Super Sprint, but that was called Jeff and Barry Racing, which was in the arcade, which was in the nightclub, I believe. And there was also an Into the Screen racing game, which had a lot of time put into it. And also we featured, I think we were the first Rare game to feature Mr. Pants.
You could turn all the ants into Mr. Pants and they all kind of hobbled awkwardly around the background as you shot them. So that was quite fun as well.
But we ran into some problems with the age rating because we realised then you could obviously decapitate a man dressed in underwear, which wasn't what we expected to do when we started making the game. So I think a few compromises had to be made on that, and setting Mr. Pants on fire was ditched from the game as well.
I do remember on the end of Jet Force we were desperate to get a lot of stuff in there, so we kept kind of trying to get these features working, and as a result, we probably ended up spending some weeks towards the end where we were doing maybe like 80, 90 hours. I remember driving home some mornings at like 5 o'clock in the morning, going to bed for a few hours and then coming back in about 9. But it was just, you just loved doing it because it was something that you really wanted to get working, and you wanted it to look the way and sound the way and feel the way that you wanted. So you're kind of driven along by this kind of passion for making it work and getting the game just how you wanted it to be.
One thing we were particularly proud of was the co-op, the drop-in, drop-out co-op. Someone could come in, plug a joystick in, and then join in, and then play as Floyd the robot and leave when they felt like it. As far as I'm aware, there was nothing like that at the time.
I think on the team we were really generally quite satisfied with the critical reviews we got. We got lots of 8s out of 10s, 9s out of 10s, and always lots of compliments for the art as well, which particularly pleasing from our point of view. I think the creative energy of everyone on that team really shines through in the product. We loved working on it because we had so much creative input ourselves.
Not by any means do I think it's a faultless game, but I hope that it was a fun game that people could enjoy, and it was a bit more kind of, I don't know, off the wall, I suppose, compared to a lot of games.
It's still a real gem of a game, and definitely worth checking out.